Morning. So how are we all? We having fun? Excellent. So very first thing is I can't stick around, so I'm going to run this a little oddly. I'm going to basically pause at a couple of key points for questions, so if you want to ask me, because I'm going to raise a few interesting points. Right. This has all come about because we are now playing a different game. Oh, I should turn on screen mirroring? Anyway, how many people here know me? How many people do I know? Yeah, pretty good show of hands. So some of you people will have seen this or are actually already using it, so whatever. That's fine. And we'll move on to this. We're playing a new game, is the only way I can put it. Things are happening very fast. At Mondada, we look after about 2,000 individual software titles now. And trying to keep up with the update track of that is just getting a little bit out of control. I ran some stats a few weeks ago because I was just curious about what was happening. I think we were actually, if we were to be up to date at release minute, so on release minute of every new software title that we maintain, the longest period of time that we would have actually been up to date for was around 4 hours. So that's not very long. I put that down to the shortest the shortest gap of time was 7 minutes. So that's how fast things are now happening. This is frightening. Back in the old days when we used to be, we'd build our images and things like that, and we'd deploy a monolithic image, and you would spend, a week or two building it, making sure it was right, and all the settings were good, and then right before you basically put the wrapper around it and cloned it off, an update came out. That's going to happen before you finish the OS install now. The chances are. We're going to couple that with something like the concept of BYOD. So once you have BYOD in your environment, your users are admins. They're going to do whatever the hell they want. And finally, last but not least, developers are actually anarchists. And I'll raise this point a little bit later on because it's kind of key. So now we have to decide what we actually really care about in our environment. I didn't bullet point this one because I kind of wanted to highlight it. First of all, the thing that you care about the most is not the latest version of the software, because that's going to be really hard to keep up with. When I said we had our time frames for how long it takes for something to come out now, you've also got to add into the fact that you need to actually package it, you need to upload it to your servers, you need to create whatever deployment policies you need for getting it out there, and you need to test it. Chances are that you can never get that done in your update window before the next update for something else comes out. So right there and then, you're screwed. We are playing a different game. So what we care about is what is the version of a piece of software, but not so much what is the version, but what is the minimum version of a piece of software that our organization can support. So if you look at it that way, you want to know about the state of the version of a piece of software, regardless of how it got onto the user's computer, because they might be an admin, they might have done it themselves, regardless of where it is, what its name is, because I don't know how many people have, that you're trying to track software by a hard-coded path of applications, whatever my app title is, and there's another one in the apps folder which ends at space 2. Or the user's pulled something out and put it on their desktop. Or they're running it off a DMG. Because that never happens. We don't see that ever. So we care about it with respect to what we're deploying. Is it our minimum supported version? Is it going to work with our infrastructure? Is it going to work with our systems? So we want a relative state. We don't want an actual version number anymore. We want to know, is it not there? Is it an older version? Is it the same version? Or is it newer? That's what you really need to be caring about now. So, oh, I have done some stuff. What happens when there's multiple versions installed? All of these things are things I see all the time, everywhere. Next thing, our software developers. What does a version, well actually, what should a version string look like? This is a widely accepted standard, correct? Am I wrong?
You're wrong.
What does it look like? So these are the standard getInfo strings, like the actual version strings that you draw out of apps. They are all real. They all just got dumped out of a database for me. I picked a couple of key ones, but as you can see, does this thing have a pointer on it? No? Yes? Yay! That has leading spaces, so does that. That has commas as delimiters. That has an alpha character of like no significant meaning in it. The following version of that product has a dot character after that. So if you use any form of traditional version comparator mechanisms, they just kind of break. And that really sucks. Because this comes to that thing that I know a lot of people bitch about this in Casper is why doesn't it have version is greater than or something along those lines? Because that is really, really hard to figure out. Because you are doing a string level comparison, which means that things need to be compared in like-for-like components. And because of the values of the ASCII set and the way programming languages work, this is not actually an easy task. So what can we do differently around this? How do we handle this? First of all, finding our apps. You can go for a default path. That's a very simple way to do it. That is actually built into almost every management tool under the sun. The second one is my favorite. I don't know what crazies still disable Spotlight, but it is now an integral part of the operating system, and it is a very, very useful thing. That simple, whoa, wrong button. That simple command, yeah. How many did I go ahead? That simple command up there will locate anything with a bundle identifier. Bundle identifiers are typically unique. It's only when you get really crappy third-party software from a developer who's kind of written it for themselves and made it public do you find that it is com.example.myapp, which is the default for Xcode. And using command line commands, like you might have command line binaries that you want to try, I guess, finding the version of from there. Anyway, to show you how that performs, because a lot of people think that Spotlight is going to be quite slow. Is there a mic on this desk somewhere? No? Or is it picking up my computer's mic? So if we do a default path check, so if the application exists somewhere, so on a specific path, we do stuff. All right, that's good. But we want to find our app. Now this will find it in that sort of speed frame, like that time frame. It's quick. And it will give you back the path to the app, regardless of what the user has done to it. So if they've renamed it and put a space 2 at the end of it, or they've put it on their desktop, or they've done something like that, you will find it. It's really that simple. And that is the most powerful tool you can use. For a command line binary, the which command, perfect. Just bang, straight back, it's in your path, there it is. So it's, for this sort of thing, because you're going to be tracking so many software titles, it's all about speed. Because if your computer has to find stuff before it can do stuff, you want it to do those things quickly. Anywho, where's my keynote? So fairly simple. Everyone keeping up with that? Yeah? Straight on. Where's the version info? So there's basically 2 places inside the application bundle where you can extract this from. Every app has an info plist file in it, which with a relative path is basically contents info plist. Some developers are really nice to you, and rather than having all of the versioning info sort of embedded in this series of keys and associated documents and all of those things, they will put it in a separate plist, and Apple do this with every one of their products called version.plist, which is also wanted inside the app bundle. That's usually what I test for first. If that exists inside the application, then use that. If it doesn't exist, then default back to something else. Theplists have, does everyone know how to use plists? Defaults write, defaults read, plist buddy, all of those things? Anyone unfamiliar with that? No? Good. Right. Which key? The default for most things is to use the CF bundle short version string. It's always a mouthful to say, and it's a bugger to type, but that's fine. And that is where you'll find most of the, in Casper, the version reporting information comes out of that particular plist key. There is another one in there which is CF bundle version, which you would want to use sometimes. On my list of anarchist versions, most of the time when the version string reads like that, you will find a CF bundle version that is actually accurate and numeric and resembles far more a traditional version string. And then sometimes it's a custom key. If you've ever pulled an Adobe product apart and had a look in the info plist, they actually have 4 or 5 keys, which unfortunately they change between products, so there's no consistency there. That you can dig the information out of there. So some quick examples. Microsoft, in their infinite wisdom, actually used the version string, which reports back a human readable thing for some of their products, which is always fun. So if we look at a long plist, like a plist, and I was talking about where the keys are, so this is when you look at the whole thing. So when you're reading that, it's a pain, but you can identify your version key from there. The version plist, much shorter, much easier. Your information's right in there. It's right up in your grill. So that's really good, so we can use that. We want to pull back an exacting version string from something. So I'm using Microsoft's remote desktop product here. So anyone look in the App Store and see what the version number is of the current version? It is actually 8.0.32. That's what they're broadcasting. But the version number doesn't appear to resemble that at all. And neither does the bundle version, but it's like I said with the custom key format. You can find it. And they are consistent with it. So where you can draw your information back and report on the version that's in the product is fairly straightforward and simple. So I'm not really covering anything else. Rehearsal is always a good thing because then you can remember what order your slides were in. Adobe. This was hard. Now, they use, actually, yeah, let's do this. So, here we have a list of every patch level of Adobe product from CS6 onwards and their CF bundle short version string. This is a bit worrying because we have a change there, but they have the same version. How do you patch that? Because I know one of those is 12.2.1. So they got lazy, they didn't change it. We go over here and we've got things that are going to be a bit fun to compare because at that point in time things are going to get ugly. We've got things that are open quoted, we've got things that have leading and trailing spaces, we have things that are numeric values, we have things that have dashes in them. That's a bit weird. We have things that have strings that tell you what the product is beforehand. And then my personal favorite, Illustrator. How? Why? On what planet is this a good idea? So how do you deal with that? And then I got to thinking. Adobe has its own updater engine. It knows what's going on. So how? How does it know what's going on? Where does it get its information from? So I don't know, I don't think anyone here has been to, or very few people here have been to a Mac sysadmin, but last year, if you get onto their website and download Ed Marzak's talk on stack tracing what a binary does, do that. It's really useful, particularly if you want to know what a virus did to your computer. It is an incredibly good talk and he makes it very simple and easy to follow. And I employed that technique. And I figured out at this point in time that not all the time, but most of the time, that Adobe store their data in a SQLite database. The first entry is the current one for everything up to CC 2015. The second one is what I think it is for CC 2015 point whatever the new things are, because they decided not to be consistent. Surprise, because they have 2015.2, 2015.3, 2015.4, 2015.5. I think that's the database, but I can't verify that until they release an update, which I'm really surprised that in 2 weeks we haven't seen. Anyway, as an example of how to actually use that, from the command line, very simply in Bash, that tells me I've got the Photoshop core engine installed, and that's the updater patch. 2 simple keys and a query on the database, and suddenly I know my exacting version of my installed version of Photoshop. Simple, fairly straightforward. I've got a dummy of the 2015.5 on my desktop, so we will query that. And you'll have to excuse me for copying and pasting the commands. I can't type when people are watching me. That's the current version of Photoshop. Now that file lives side by side with the other one at the moment. It coexists. So if you know what you're looking for, you have a look at the products and you break it down and you look for the keys in this database, you can do very simple queries to it and pull back accurate version information in realistic version strings that you can use. This is very important. Sometimes it's in an XML file. You know, developers are anarchists. I don't want to use a plist. I'm going to put an XML file in my app. Crap. And for all you scripters out there who use Bash, I'm going to do a comparison of what happens when you use a different language to get this. Because while you might want to use Bash because you're comfortable with it, you'll find that once you start getting into the heavier lifting for this sort of technique, you're going to need a higher level language. And I like Python. This is what caused me to really learn Python properly. So if I do a query of an XML file on my desktop, anyone guess what that's the version XML file for? Sutcliffe? Looks familiar. Sorry? Yep. But I don't want all of that, and I need to know what it is, and I'm not going to go through the syntax you'd use in Bash to do it. But I want, in particular, a key out of the XML, just one value to return it back. So I'm spitting back a single node here. But you can see that I get found one nodes in that node. If you're populating a Bash variable with that, and I'm just going to throw this on the end of it so it creates a new line because it comes back with a very short string and it'll bump into my cursor and it'll look like it did nothing. But you can pull the key out just by piping. So for some reason or other, XPath pipes its information out to standard error, which you can suppress really quickly. Now, I am going to do this in Python. And I'm going to use variables so that people can copy and paste this out of the PDF of the slide deck later, because it is useful. You want an XML parser. So I'm just going to import a library. I'm just telling it where my source file is, so I don't have to type it all in. Oops, wrong one. This is the XML tag I'm looking for. And that is pulling the version out from all those variables. So it's not very difficult. It's really, really quite simple. And so at this point in time, you need to start steering away from what you've always done. Other things that you'll find this information in, I have seen applications which have this in a text file that sits side by side with the application. There is no versioning info in the plist at all. Some of them have it in a JSON file, which once you're in that land, you are using Python. There is no other way, or no other effective way. And sometimes you have to execute a command. So we've got all of these different mechanisms. Now we've got the version strings, what the hell do we do with them? Because I've already established the fact that you could have something that is just really quite wacky, and you're going to have to find a way to do a comparison to get this, for want of a better term, what I call the state. Everything, unfortunately, does need to have some form of numeric value in it. Because if you're comparing strings, it's a lexical comparison. It'll do it based on the ASCII value of the characters, and you can't be guaranteed. When you have something like the particular piece of software that up there that had Prince's hair in Purple Rain, also has versions of Tina Turner's hair in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and David Bowie's hair in Labyrinth. So, I mean, there's a common theme there, but it's absolutely useless for us. So you need to strip the leading and trailing noise and work out that you have at least one numeric value at the start. I don't care if it doesn't have it after that. And then use a comparison algorithm. I wrote my own, and this is the closest thing out there in the public sphere that is like it. I can't part with my own because it's proprietary source, but this is a simple method of using Python to do your version comparison. So when you Google doing version comparison in Python, you will find that you get these results back for something that's out of, I think, distutils, and that comparator has what they call strict version and loose version in it. And strict version will validate that it is numbers and dots and nothing else. Loose version will handle alpha characters, but it does a lexical comparison. This one is actually from the Python packaging utility, which does a thing with, and I was kind of a bit upset when I found this because I'd spent an awful lot of work building something not dissimilar, and then I saw that the technique that they were using was very close to mine. I just put a couple of extra little bits in it to help. They break the string up into an object, and they do the object separated by like components. So when you feed it two version strings, it does a like component for like component comparator. So when you get this scenario here where we have this, the x after the 5.0x, it will actually pad the version and put another numeric value based on the other one in there, so that then you have two like-for-like version strings, and it does this on the fly. So that's really cool. I went a bit further than that. I kind of converted everything to binary blobs and then did it from there, which was sort of kind of crazy, but it was a lot faster. So we can actually use this inbuilt mechanism from Python. If you're writing a script, you only have to import this one little function, and it will tell you some things about your version in regard to state. So if I punch this into my terminal now, and I'm going to do this block, I want my two version strings. All right, so I'm just assigning variables to it so that you can see how this works, and we can switch them around later. I'm just going to pull all of this in one go because it's not going to put any output out until it completes the if statement from the command line. That's all done. So it validates that. Every other mechanism I've seen comes back with the earlier version is actually newer. So this thing is accurate, and it's really good, incredibly powerful. And then you can do things like range limit it. So is it inside? I didn't put my min-max in there. I think that's on a later slide. Yeah, that's right. Ah, yes, I do touch on range limiting. All right, so let's get out of Python for now. So don't reinvent the wheel. Use things that exist when you can. There are some really cool things out there. This is one of them. You might want to range limit a version. So sometimes products have the same bundle identifier through different major releases of it, but you want to determine if you have that particular major release with Microsoft Office, which is actually what I used for this example here. We're going to do the same thing again. And of course, I quit Python. Let's clear our buffer. I want that. So I've got my parse version back in again. So my minimum, my maximum. Now, I put the maximum as like a theoretical next version, because otherwise I would have to say that my maximum would be 15.9999999999999, and we don't want to do that. That's just ugly. 16 is good, and just make your comparator to be a less than at the tail end. So now, current version of Office 2011, I am testing for Office 2016 here. I don't have it. Simple. Really simple. Current version of Office 2016. And we should be able to do it again. Yes, I do have it. So we can now test to see if our version is in range, and then we can use the comparator algorithm afterwards if we get a true match. And suddenly things are looking pretty nice at this point in time. Okay. Where are we up to? Oh, I'm going to come up with it before I do a demo, because I'm actually going to do a practical use case of this. I'm going to use Casper because that's what I've been doing it in all the time. So I'm sorry for those who aren't using Casper, but that's fine. Do we have any questions about this? Is everyone just frightened, scared, not understanding it? Am I the crazy person again? That happens. But it's something that we need to be kind of, I don't know how to put it, really, really quite focused on. Because it's a very different way of looking at things. It's a different way of doing things. It involves learning a new language if you're trying to script this. There's a lot of really important stuff in that. So anyway, if no one's... Yeah.
With your MD5 command,
yep.
how does it work if people are running, say, something out of a DMG?
Well, I actually tell it to ignore the DMGs
Okay.
when I do the find. Basically, if it's not on the startup disk, I don't consider it as being valid. Because from a perspective of guiding, not managing your computers and your users, you want the software to actually be installed. And I consider that as being a false positive, like as in a not installed because it's running off a DMG. See, any others? No? Okay. All right. Oops. No, I don't want that address. Anyone guess what that was? So, Casper users, show of hands. Good, this is not going to be lost on anyone. Right, what I do. That's frightening. They're all in EAs. There's about a couple of hundred of them in my demo system. They handle all of the Adobe products. So one of the reasons why I'm really getting all Python, is because it's fast. The reason why it's fast is when you do something in Bash and you call something to get a value, it calls an external program usually. So it has to invoke, it has to execute, it has to return its result. If you do it in Python and you call a library, that's quick. And then you execute it from within Python, you haven't called an external function yet. It comes back to you in about 2 orders of magnitude less time. So those of you who are using Casper and you have tons and tons of EAs, you'll find that you have slow execution time and database bloat. So the other criteria I really wanted to do it with integer values, but I chose not to because it's a little bit more human readable to not do it with integers. But you'd be able to reduce the database footprint hugely, as well as like the result calculation and other things that go around that. So short responses, quick uploads, and very fast execution. This adds about 0.03 of a second to a recon time. So it's nothing if you do it right. Now, I'm just going to open a few of these up. That's just that way. This is actually a good one because it's a pain in the ass. Yeah.
One thing I think you should actually clarify that having all 200 only adds 0.3.
Yes, by the way. That's not per EA. That is all of them together. So it was adding 3 to 4 seconds when I did it in Bash, but 0.03, not 0.3, 0.03 of a second. That'll do. All right, so we've got some more. So I'm sorry to do this to people. So this is a simple EA. I've actually set relatively simple. I've set up a bunch of parameters at the top. I'm looking for a bundle identifier. I have a version. I don't really care about what range it is, and I put a default path in there. Because testing for a default path is actually really quick. It's quicker than finding it with Spotlight. I'm not sure in how many milliseconds, nanoseconds, microseconds, whatever, how much faster it is. But the first step I do is I actually look for it at a path. If it's not there, then go for a hunt. Doesn't really blow it out too much. I import all of my libraries. I do stuff. I have a bunch of functions that do the comparison and report back if it's not there, blah, 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 blah. So that's a simple bundle find. This one does an Adobe database query, so I know where that is. Sorry, no, actually, this one does a plist to add a path query. So this was an interesting use case because the Camera Raw plugin and for CS6 and CC have the same bundle identifier, but they have different paths. And they have sometimes the same version number. So that kind of screwed all of that up. So I had to add a mechanism in there for just going for a plist, add a path, and pulling the info out. This is really, really useful for not applications, because applications can get shunted around. But things like internet plugins, application support plugins, stuff like that, things that you know that they just simply don't work if they've been moved. So they're not going to function in the application if it's been shifted. So you can consider it not installed at that point in time. So if it returns back null, it's not there. That's simple. It ain't going to work. So you can install over the top of that. That's fine. Microsoft Office, where I did a range limiter. So I do both testing for a version string and limiting it to a range. So I determine whether or not I do or don't have something. I really wanted to put up an Adobe database one, which I seem to have missed. We'll just take Illustrator. Because back over here, when I said querying the Adobe database, I have, I believe, an excerpt from the Adobe database. So the things in orange are actually valid, they work, they can be used. So it seems when Adobe don't always get it right in the database, when they don't get it right in the database, they do get it right in the info plist, even if the version string is crazy. But I was mentioning Illustrator before. Consistent all the way through. See? So you've got to find it. You've got to find that single source of truth. You've got to use that. So here's something that finds Illustrator, so that's easy. We don't have to range limit it because we know we have unique keys for the application, so you can just bang it back and get a result, yes or no. Did it return a result? No, so it's not installed, fine. Did it return a result? Yes. What's the results value? Do a comparison, yay. All good. Right, that's that. So I have all of these EAs. Then I created a bunch of smart groups to work out whether or not the application was installed. So when you're trying to figure out if something is installed, so all of the EAs return the same values. So I took something that was totally anarchistic, if that's even a word, and I applied, I think there's 7 different mechanisms that you really will need to use to obtaining the version information, and then everything else below that in that EA does exactly the same thing. So it rationalizes the version string and it compares it, and it returns the same set of results. With an EA and Casper, you always want to use known values if you are scoping an install. Do not scope for is not, because you will end up installing in some really bizarre circumstances. So I wanted to know, is my product installed? Is it older? Is it equal? Is it newer? If it meets one of those things, then yes, it's there. All right? I wanted to know, do I need to update it? If it is there. So right now, I actually don't care how the software got there. I just care if it's there. If it's there, I then start to care about the version. Is it up to date? So this works in a BYOD environment. This works when your users are admins. This works when your users move software around. This works, just works. So that's good. We've got that. We've scoped our smart groups, and then we create policies to do the actual deployment. Now, I'm a big fan of self-service. So if I just do a quick search in here, and this laptop, I have a look at it. I see a lot of NAs. I'm actually going to change that to none, which is really annoying because now I have to update about 500 or 600 files and then 500 or 600 EAs. So I've got an equal here, so it's installed and it's fine. I've got an equal. equal. Oh, this is all looking pretty good. Oh, wait a minute, I've got a newer version of that. I've got a newer version of that. Newer, so we don't care about any of that stuff yet. We still haven't found anything to do. And here we go, older. An older version of Excel, an older version of Skype. Yeah. An older version of Firefox. So from the perspective of your self-service portal, when you present all of the policies up, I just put them on the features page. That's the stuff that's out of date on my computer when it checked in. That's the stuff that's available for me that I haven't already installed. That's the stuff that's available for me to uninstall that I haven't uninstalled before. Fairly straightforward. Do we have any questions about this? No? Yes?
Are you generating the extension attributes and the smart groups through the API?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question, Adobe?
Am I generating the extension attributes and the smart groups through the API? Because this is a lot of work to set up manually. So I've got an API script that I use. I'm not really willing to release that into the wild, mostly because I don't want to hose anyone's database. But I'm happy to hose my own because I back it up right before I do one of these runs. So yes, I'm generating all of that stuff. It's fun. And if I'm updating them via the API, I actually delete them and recreate them because it's really hard to edit them via the API, or so I'm finding at the moment. But I could be doing something wrong. This is just one man's opinion, and a guy was screwing around with this for about 3 weeks. Mind you, I had the idea for a lot longer. So that's what we get. All right, so I've actually finished way ahead of time, which I wasn't sure that I would. Do we have any other questions? Does anyone want to grill me about anything else? No? Yes? Maybe?
What software has Prince's hair as a version?
Yo. And the other one that was a string I kind of like beset by computers, that's Git, which is, I think, even the current version at the moment. Yeah, Git. Cool. Anything else? Yes?
So how would you say this matches up with auto package and its sort of versions? Is it doing a lot of what you're doing? Are you doing it better?
It's doing it differently, and auto package kind of works. So here's the thing, and I do actually say this without vested interest, is you want to get your stuff from a trusted source. Auto package is community driven. I know that Tim does actually vet everything because I see it when I catch up with Tim that people say, hey, I've got some new packages, new recipes, can you have a look at them? But the version control here, we're not actually talking about packaging. What we're talking about is gathering your inventory information to work out what you need to deploy. So it's a different game. Does that make sense? I answered your question, because I'm pretty sure that auto package doesn't do your inventory check and work out whether or not it needs to push out the software. So what I'm trying to provide here is the middleware that lives between whatever you're using to build your stuff, or whatever installation mechanism you're using, and what your client computer actually has on it, so that you can work with respect to that. Because you don't really want to deploy an older version of something over a newer version of something, particularly if it's Firefox and you hose all of your users' bookmarks. They get really pissed off. I don't know why that is, but yes. Any other questions? Marcus?
Have you provided feedback to Adobe about their version control?
Yes, I have. I did a sort of, a little bit of feedback, actually. It was supposed to be a little bit of feedback. It was originally spec'd for being just a few paragraphs. It turned into War and Bloody Peace. But the thing about that is, the problem exists. You know, they can fix it now. It's not actually going to impact us as sysadmins for about 4 years, because we have to wait till they expire all of the stuff that's out there in the field and is already, well, not in great shape. Does that make sense? So yes, I did, and I have seen that some of that has been taken on board. In fact, it was taken on board almost immediately, and I followed it with the email saying, well, that's great that you're doing it now, but it still doesn't help us retrofitting that. So that's kind of why I did most of this stuff, is because while people get their act together, and that's going to be very important, major vendors get their act together, we still have this huge time gap where we have to fill that hole and deal with it in its current state, because we have to wait for all of the versions to expire. Any other questions? Rich?
Have you found a good way of pulling out version information for Java applications? Because in particular, there's a couple of applications used for image analysis.
Yep.
ImageJ and
Yep.
PG, that I actually, for the auto package recipe for it, I had to go and scrape a web page.
Yeah.
Because you can't pull it, as far as I can tell, out of the application.
I won't leave the client system when I do things like that. It can be hard. There are a few things I'm not yet sure how to deal with, and most of which are Java stubs. If the developer's been at least reasonably nice, which I know the ImageJ developer isn't, you're kind of screwed at that point in time. Well, actually, we've got 3 minutes to go, so good enough. All right, thank you, everyone.